So we're going to be building the website that's going to utilize the GraphQL server that we built yesterday. Now, before we get into doing that, I wanted to add one thing to the server. So yesterday when I was making changes to it, I would come to the command line, Control-C, and restart the server. I don't know why I didn't add this before, but I guess I just forgot about it. I really like adding this guy right here, no daemon. And this is a dev dependency that I added and that we can run. And what this will do is, and you'll notice I changed this is in the package.json of the server. I changed the command that gets run. So usually it would just run tsnode on the index file. Now it's going to run no daemon. And what that's going to do is it's going to search our files or watch our files. And whenever we make a change, it's going to automatically restart the server. So I have the server up and running right now as we build up the website, so just to let you know about that. So let's go ahead and build this website. So I've already got it set up. So here's the folder structure that I have set up. So I have the server folder, and then I have this folder called web. So how I set up the web is I ran the boilerplate for create React app TypeScript. So that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to suggest you do the same, and this is what you need to run. So we can copy that. So in this basically top level folder, I just created an app called web. So I said npx create React app, and I called it web, and I told it to use the TypeScript script. And so that'll create a folder called web that we can cd into, and this is what we're going to use for our project. So I already have this open up in Visual Studio Code, and I already added some packages that you're going to want to install as well. So let's go ahead and do yarn add, and we're going to add these guys. So React Router DOM, so we're going to be using this for routing. Apollo Boost, we're going to be using that to use Apollo and to make GraphQL requests to our server. And then that relies on having both GraphQL and React Apollo to do. So go ahead and install those, and then we're going to need some dev dependencies. And the dev dependencies we're going to need are some types. So the ones that we need are React Router DOM, and then we're also going to need to install Apollo. This is a CLI tool that we can use to actually generate some TypeScript definitions, which we're going to get into in a little bit. And then lastly, the types for GraphQL. So once you have that all installed, we're ready to start coding some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just start this up. That's the other thing you can do, is you want to make sure that you got everything set up correctly. You can just do yarn start and you should see this. And looks like we got something messed up. So we need to add the async iterator to our tsconfig. So let's do that. So that should be, I actually totally forgot about this. That's going to be ESNext. Was it async iterator? Yeah. I think this is what we can add. So this is to our tsconfig, and we can add a library there. And go ahead and restart that, and I think it should work. If that doesn't work, we can just add the whole ESNext library, which may be worth adding. But that looks like it fixed it, and now we can see that that worked. So perfect. So the first thing that we're going to set up here is going to be React Router. I'm going to go ahead and just create a file here called routes, and I'm going to create routes, and I'm going to say browser router, and this is coming from React Router DOM, as you can see. And here I'm going to say switch. So switch is something that I use so it only gets one route rendering, and we're going to say route. So React Router, and we're going to have two routes here, at least to begin with. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder here, which I guess I'm going to call modules. And we'll create a folder here called user. And inside of our user, we're going to have a login.tsx. So let's go ahead and run that. And I'm going to call this the login view instead. So login view. Login view. And then for now, I'm just going to say div login view. And then we're going to fill this with content in a second. Not sure what this is complaining about. Let's go ahead and just turn this rule off. So that's going to be in tslint. So I'm going to say rules, and then just turn this off, which is actually, I think it wants false instead of 0. All right, so I have the login view. We're also going to set up a register view today, and let's set that up. Register view. And then we're also going to have a me view. Me view is not something we're actually going to use, but we're just going to use it today to make sure the login and stuff works. So let's copy that, paste it in here. And the point of this page is to actually just call the me query so we can see that. So let's come back to our routes over here, and we're going to say path login, and we're going to pass in a component, which is going to be the login view. Let's see what it's complaining about here. Okay, don't care about ordering my imports. Turn that off as well. And then let's do the register and the me path. So let's copy that. Register and then me. Alright, so server's still up. Forgot to render this. Let's go to our app. Well, I guess we'll just change our index. So our index here, let's go ahead and just render our routes instead of the app. Alright, render must be public or private. Where is that coming from? It's coming from our login view. I thought we turned that rule off. I guess I'm gonna have to restart this to be able to turn that off. And I'm just gonna have my full stack project open right here. I think what I'm gonna do is just see what I turn off for the tslint rules. I forgot I have in the base directory. So I can turn off all those rules, because there's some rules I just don't care about. So let's go ahead and copy that. And I'll link this if you want to ignore these rules as well. So these are just some that I like to just remove from the default rules that they have set for us. Alright, so server started okay. I just wanted to verify that the routes were working. So we have now /login, you can see our login view, /register, you can see our register view. Alright, so that is a good setup there. And let's go ahead and start, I guess, with register. So what we want to do on the register page is have a form, and when we fill out this form, we'd like to call the register mutation. So let's go ahead and, I guess, create our form first. Now normally I would use Formic to do this, but I'm going to keep this real simple and just set up the form in the state and use local state because it'll be simpler. But I would recommend doing Formic if you want to. But this tutorial, we're not going to focus on all the best practices for forms, and our form is going to be very basic. All we're going to do is take an email and a password, and let's create a handle change function. And this is going to take an event, and the event's going to be type of, I'm just going to call it any. Get the name and get the value from the target. And we're going to set the state of that, and we're going to say name is equal to value. So now what that allows us to do is I'm going to wrap this entire thing in a form, and we're going to have two inputs. And let's destructure our state. So we're going to have password and email. So let's go ahead and add a placeholder for that. That'll be our email. The value is going to be the value of the email in the state. And then on change, we're going to pass this .handle change. And then we just have to give it a name. So the name is going to be password. And the name should be email. I'm not sure why I did password right there. But we want the name here to match what we call it in the state, which is email. And that's what we use when we update the state here. So email means we're going to use the email to update the state. So copy this, make this a password. And then we just need to say type password. And if we wanted to, we could set this as a type email, for example. Well, you know what, we'll say type text. That's fine. We could make an email if we want to, but I'm not going to worry about it. So this is our form. We could add a button at the bottom. And we could make this, instead of just making it a form, why don't we just make it a div? And we'll just use the button to register. So I'm going to say on click. And then on click here, I'm just going to console log for now. And then this is what we're going to submit, and we're going to add that in a second. I turned off that rule, I thought, but I think I just need to restart the server again because we added that rule after the server started. Alrighty, so we have that. The next step is, assuming this works, is to set up Apollo. And I'm going to be using Apollo Boost for that. And nice, looks like we can type stuff and we can click register, and I think that'll be good to go. Why don't we just make this a little bit better, or format it a little bit better. We're going to style this later, but I want to just put these into divs so they stack, and then I want to just center this. So what I'm going to do is say style, and I think what I'm going to do is say display flex. And then what this is going to do is it's going to stack them actually all this way. So I'm going to say flex direction column. And let's go ahead and add a comma. So now they're going to be like that. And I'm just going to wrap the button in a div so it doesn't expand all the way. All right, and now I just want to center this. So I'm going to say line items center, justify content center. That might center it in the middle of the page. Nope, that's what I wanted. So now we just have that in the middle here. That's all I wanted to set up. All right, so let's set up Apollo. So that's going to be over here. So for this, I'm going to be using Apollo Boost. This used to have a problem with it, but I think it should be fixed now, at least with using cookies. So we'll give that a try. And this is basically what we want to set up. So I'm just going to copy this right here. We already installed Apollo Boost, so we can just go ahead and use this. So here's our Apollo app, and we're going to just say Apollo provider. And we're just going to wrap our route right here. And then we can get rid of this bit. So we're going to pass in our client. And we want to keep this import. We already have some of the imports that we need above. And I'm going to just move these. I like to split my absolute and my, so my absolute up here and then my relatives here. And then here's my client. And then here we're just going to pass in the URL. So this is where our server is located. In this case, localhost 4000. And I think by the default it's at /GraphQL. Let's go ahead and verify what it is. Yep, localhost /GraphQL is where it's at. All right, so we have that. Oh, let's do an L at the end. So we have that. So now we can actually start writing mutations. So that's going to be over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and use the mutation component from React Apollo. So that's going to wrap our entire, and actually, so this is, I haven't mentioned this before, but we have a block of code here, right? And now I want to wrap the entire thing in a rendered prop. And so what I've liked to do with that is I'll actually write out the whole thing. Oops. So this is a technique I've been using to just kind of wrap it easily. So I'll write it out like this. And this is basically the structure of the rendered prop. And now I can just easily take that end off, paste it down here, and now I wrap the entire thing. I used to kind of do a half and half where I would move the mutation component down here, and then I would add in the curly braces and then add in that, but I find it easiest if you do it like that. Anyway, that's kind of like a side thing. It doesn't really matter what you do for that. All right, so we have our mutation here. Let's go ahead and import. Oh, you know what? I didn't add GraphQL tag, but I think GraphQL tag comes from Apollo Boost, if I remember correctly. Yep, it does. So I'm going to say const register mutation. And I probably shouldn't have got rid of localhost 4000 because I want to just grab our register mutation here. So I'm going to say register. And now I'm just going to turn these into variables. And I also have to give this a name, so I'm going to call it register mutation. And I'm going to say email is going to be a string and password is a string. So this is me just setting variables. And then we can use those variables. All right, so I'm going to copy that and we'll use that here. And so now I have my register mutation. I can pass in my mutation here. So register mutation. Accidentally imported that. We don't want the service worker. Register mutation. All right, so the last thing that we're really missing here, and well, we're not technically missing it, but it will help, is, oh, sorry, this should be mutate. So we have our function here, and right now it's not added type, so there's no type definitions to this, and we're using TypeScript, so it's kind of nice to know what variables we need to pass to this mutation function and whatnot. So that's where the Apollo CLI comes in. So we can use this, the CLI tool right here, in which we already downloaded it. And what this tool allows us to do, there's a lot of commands we can use to download and then generate some types. In this case, generate TypeScript types. So right here I have, I install it locally, so I install it as a dev dependency instead of globally. So that's something I like to do. And we're gonna set this up right now. So you could go through this and you can read through all the examples here, but I already have a kind of some commands that I like to run that I'm going to copy, and we're going to go through what these actually do. So this is what I used in a previous project that seemed to work out pretty well, but we'll have to take a look and see if it works with the newest version. And this is what we're just going to add to our package.json. So we're going to add some scripts here. All right, give that a save. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to call the Apollo CLI. So I made one command called schema download. So this is going to call the Apollo CLI, and we're going to download the schema. So what this is going to do is generate a schema.json file, and it's going to be in our entire schema. And it's going to download it from our server. So it's going to get it from our server. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to run this command right here. So I called it cogen generate. And what this is going to do, it says Apollo cogen generate, and I'll link this below if you want to copy this because this is pretty long as well. So we specify where we're getting our queries from. So look for all the source files in our directory that end with a .tsx. So in this case, our register view over here has a .tsx ending. So it's going to look through and it's going to notice, it's going to look for all of these things. And then for each one, it's going to generate some TypeScript types for it. So we told it use TypeScript, and then we're saying here's our schema. And I think I need to add an output. So there's a flag on here that I need to add. I think it's called output file. Output. Something about flat output. Yes, that's what I want to add. So what this will do is it'll generate a single large TypeScript file that we can use. And I prefer just having them all in one. So you'll see what this is in a second. And then lastly, we just point it to the name of the file that we wanted to create. So in this case, it's going to create a file called schema types. And then this last one is to run both of these. So I'm going to download the schema and then generate it. If we wanted to, and I'm going to open up a new one, we could run these one by one. So I could say yarn schema download. And I guess that's better so we can see what we did wrong. Expected undefined to be a GraphQL schema. Oh, so for us, our endpoint is that /GraphQL. So I forgot about that. On another project I was using, it was just that. So we'll download that. So it looks like it was successful. And now we have a new file over here called schema.json. So if that worked, you should get this. And this is basically a big JSON dump of your schema. So next we were going to turn that schema into something useful by generating TypeScript types. So cogen generate. All right, let's see what we got messed up. And cannot use GraphQL scalar type string from another module or realm. Okay, so I actually was having some trouble with Apollo CLI yesterday when I was working on another project, and I think I might know the problem that we're having here. So if you don't have this problem, it's possible you don't, because it has to do, and look, I already have auto-completion because I was working with this yesterday. So let's take a look. So notice the version of this, so 13.2. So I got that by looking at the node modules and then looking at the Apollo package that we're using, and then the node modules for that. So they're using an older version of GraphQL, and we are using GraphQL 14. So they just have not upgraded their GraphQL yet. So a temporary solution is to actually just kill that GraphQL package. Now another solution is probably to downgrade our own GraphQL to like version 13 or something. So I'm just going to go ahead and say remove RF and kill the Apollo node modules GraphQL. Now at some point the package itself, and there's already some issues on the GitHub repo about it I was looking at some point they're probably going to upgrade that. But notice now it works just fine. So basically it's just a type mismatch. They have an older version of GraphQL than what we have installed. So that's one way to remedy it. Alright, that's all to do is we generated now this thing right here. There's not a lot right now, it's just a single register mutation, but this will be helpful when we add more and more types. Alright, so what we can do with that now is I can say register mutation and register mutation variables. And it's not letting me autocomplete it from there, so I'll just type it in regularly. And now it's going to know, it's going to give us type definitions, or at least we're going to have type definitions. So I can do something like this, for example. So I can say const response. I'm going to make this function asynchronous. And we're going to await mutate. And now it knows that my variables, that I should have an email and a password in there. So I'm going to say email, and I'm going to say password. And we're just going to be passing in what the current value is from the state that we have up here. So that, I think that's fine. I don't know if we're going to have to, I could also just say this.state and pass it in like that. And then I'm going to console.log response. And then I'm just going to navigate the page. So I'm going to say this.props.history.push, and then we're going to go to login. We haven't talked about this yet, but this history thing here is a React router thing that allows us to change pages. So I'm registering a user, then I'm just going to go to a different page. In this case, it's going to be the login page, so I can now log in with the user I just created. History is not in our type definition right now, so we can tell React about it by saying, by adding our props right here. So I can say route component and just pass it in like that. So route component props is coming from React router DOM. So sometimes you have to change that. And what you do there is just route component props and then angle brackets. And then if your route has any kind of variables in it, in this case we don't, you can add it here, but we don't have any variables, so we just say an empty object. Alright, so now it knows about history. So let's try this out. Come back over here, we're going to inspect, say console, and here I'm going to say c@c.com. It's kind of my new favorite email for some reason. And we're going to register this user, and it says register true, and it takes us to the login page. So I've now created that user. So cool. So the next thing I want to do is create the login for that. So I'm just going to copy t-register. I guess I should have waited to create this. And we're going to do basically a mirror of this, but instead of register, login. So login view, and it's going to be a route. Here I'm going to name this login mutation, and we're going to say login mutation, login, and now we can get an email and ID back because this is a user that we get back from this. Everything else looks like it can stay the same. We still want email and password variables passed in. Now that I added a new login mutation here, I can come back over here and I'm just going to say yarn generate types. It's going to download the schema and then check the types and generate it. So now in our schema types, we now also have a login as well as a register. Alright, so down here I can say login mutation and login mutation variables and copy. And well, get rid of those, we don't need them anymore, and download, or not download, but import that as well. We'll pass in our login mutation here, and everything else should stay the same. And then at the end here, we're going to call the mutate, takes the same things, and now we're going to go to me instead. So instead of register, we're going to call it login here. Alright, so I'm going to enter c@c.com, and we're going to log in. We just called the login mutation, and we can see we got the right user back, c@c.com, and the ID is 3. Awesome. So the next step, or the final step that I want to do in this video, is to be able to know who this user is now. So we just logged them in. So when I come to me.com, I want to display the user. So I'm going to come over here to me, and we're going to use that me query that we set up. So here I'm going to say query from React Apollo, and here we're just going to say a div, and then I really just want to display the email of the user. So I want to get that back from the query. So we're going to say query here, and we're going to say me query, and that's something we need to create. And we're going to say GQL here and import that. Let's go ahead and just use an import statement. So Apollo Boost. And then here we're going to say this is just going to be a query, and we're going to say me, and then we're going to get an ID and email back from that user. We can say me query here, and there's no variables that we really need to pass in. We can generate the types for this, and so we can pass that in here. So I can say me query, and it's not going to give me auto completion, so let's pass it over. There we go. For some reason it won't let me autocomplete on this first parameter, but it will if it's on the second. So anyway, we don't have any variables to pass in here. If we did have a variable for our query, we could pass it as a second parameter to the type definition, but we don't need to. So that type we got from our schema types again. And now what I can do is I can say data and then loading, and I'm going to say if we're loading, we're going to return null. Otherwise, I'm going to say data, and I guess data can sometimes be undefined now. Yeah. All right, I'm going to just make this simpler and make this return like that. And I'm going to say if loading, we're going to return null. So instead of a ternary, I'm just going to use some if statements. Or data, I guess we'll do another if statement. Data, and we're going to say here, so I want to check, I want to know if the data is undefined, so I'm going to say data is undefined. And then the next thing is me, so if we don't have a user, I'm going to say return here, and I'm going to say no user, or received no user. And then lastly, if it got to this final point, that means we got a user, and we can look at its email of that user. All right, so here's our me query, and I think it should not work right now. Let's see if that is true. I think we should not have a token. But okay, it looks like it set the token. I was thinking we might not have a token because I didn't set include on the credentials when we set up Apollo Boost, for those of you that know what that is. And it looks like we received no user here even though we have a cookie. So that's what I expected. So I'm going to log in here. Log in, receive no user. Okay, cool. So we didn't get a token like I thought we would. Or sorry, not a token, but a cookie. So you saw when we logged in on the playground over here that I would get a cookie when I logged in. But I'm not getting a cookie right now when I log in here. So I'm not getting a user over here. And the way we know whether we have a user or not is by checking that cookie. So why aren't we getting a cookie, right? Well, right now we had not set the credentials to include. So remember in the playground when we went over here and we said credentials include? Well, we also have to do that for Apollo Boost. So that's going to be in our index, not the CSS. I'm just going to go ahead and delete some of these things that we don't need. So index.css, this app.tech, test, app.css, and this logo. That way it's a little cleaner. All right. So now over here in my client, I can pass in some arguments. So some things that I care about. In this case, the credentials I'm going to set to include. Now the other thing, if this does not work, I think the other thing I need to specify. Are we importing? Yep, we're importing index.css right there. So the other thing is I think we need to change our cores, but we'll see if that's a problem in a second. Yeah, so failed to fetch. So I think our server is up. Let's double check. Yep, server's up. So this is a very common error right here. So read it closely because you're probably going to get it yourself. And here's what it says. So response pre-flight request did not pass. And here's the thing you want to look at. So it says, it'll tell you what it's set to. So right now it's set to a star, and we don't want it set to a star. and it says we need to set it to this right here. So we're going to copy this. And the way we actually fix this is by going to our server, and this is what's called a CORS issue. So we can actually pass in, so we can either import a CORS module, which we might have to do if this doesn't work, but there's actually a CORS option on Apollo server now. So let's try using that first. And what we can say here is, here I'm going to say credentials include, and I think, origin is what we want. And so here I'm going to paste in that, and I guess I'm missing something I need to pass in. Cores are incompatible, types, credentials are incompatible, string is not assigned to, here you want to say credentials is true. So there you go, you just saw a nice thing about TypeScript. If I was using JavaScript, I would have just had include here, which I guess would actually become true. Because that's how TypeScript works, or how JavaScript works, is that a string with length greater than 0 is true. But in this case, we want to pass in a boolean and say credentials true. All right, so I think now we should be able to get that pre-flight, or we shouldn't get that pre-flight error. And our server should have automatically restarted, so we can try that. And bam, it worked. So I wasn't actually sure if it was going to work. I'm glad it did, because, well, dealing with cores is always a problem. So you notice we didn't get that pre-flight error, and when we logged in, we got our user here. And you'll notice on this me query now, it has the correct user, and it knows we are that user because now we're able to set that cookie, and we can grab that user. So again, notice how this persists when I refresh the page, or like if I open up, even if I open up a new tab, yeah, it'll persist the cookie. So we didn't have any settings on what we want this cookie to do, but you can also, in the session object that we created over here, so this thing right here, you can talk about, there's a prop on here or a setting that you can say how the cookie should behave, whether it should be cleared after a certain amount of time or whatnot, so you can fiddle with that. But that's what I wanted to do here. So we got to the point where we're now able to register a user on the front end, log in, and then see who that user is based off of the cookie in the me thing. So that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.